Hi, and welcome to the Smart Divorce Podcast. I'm delighted to be joined today by Claire Black. Claire is a a specialist breakup and divorce coach. She works with clients to empower them to create new and vibrant lives after divorce. She also wrote a fabulous book called Breakup: From Crisis to Confidence, which is the essential guide for anyone facing a sudden separation, or in fact, any kind of separation whatsoever. It's a brilliant book with loads of practical advice in it and things you can actually get off your backside and go and do to help on the spot. So yeah, I can highly recommend that. Claire, welcome to the podcast.
Hi Tamsin, thank you for having me.
That's a pleasure. Thank you for joining me. I am really looking forward to our conversation today, because I was just thinking before, although I feel like I know you really well, we've never actually spoken before.
No, this is the first time today.
So this should be a very interesting chat. Having read your book, I'm really excited to talk to you because I know you're going to have lots of advice for our listeners. But I wanted to take you back a bit and start by talking about what led you to becoming a divorce coach.
So really it was my own transition through my own divorce was in 2008. My own divorce was very sudden. So I had two children at the time. They were 3 and 1. Well, I've still only got 2 children, but they were 3 and 1 at the time.
You've still got the 2.
I've still got the 2, yeah. They were 3 and 1 at the time, and made their tea, put them to bed. My husband had made dinner, and we sat down and we were watching, as you do on a Tuesday night, at Holby City. And I thought he was a bit quiet, so I asked him if there was something wrong, and his next sentence was, my whole entire world fell apart in the space of time it took him to say, "I'm not really okay, no, I've been seeing someone else." And it was one of those moments where, you know, there was life before that and there was life after that. Yeah. And everything kind of fell apart at that point. My immediate reaction was, oh my goodness, I need to go out of the house, because if I go, he can't leave. So I went next door to our neighbours and stayed there for an hour or so. And when I came home, there was a bag ready and he was ready to go. And then the next 3 months, I don't massively remember. The next 3 months, a bit of a blur of crisis, lots of questions in my mind. You know, what would I be able to say where I was living? How would the children be? Would he be an absent father, or would he be a good dad? Would I manage financially? All those kinds of questions that suddenly crowd into your mind all at once. And I made a couple of decisions that really helped. Looking back, the first one was that I was going to let myself wallow in it for 3 months, and then I'd pick myself back up. And actually, what I didn't realize at the time was I was kind of training my brain to start to feel better after 3 months. So this was in March, by about June, I was beginning to think, well, there are some upsides to this. I can get a babysitter and go out when I want to. I can cook with the things I like to. I can eat with the children and not have to cook twice. I get weekends when I can go for a long bike ride by myself. All of these things started to change my perception of what was happening. And the other really good piece of advice I had from a friend who I actually met on Mumsnet. I don't know if your listeners use that, but it was a really big source of support for me at the time. And she said, put a smile on your face every morning. It will help you to feel better. And I didn't believe her at first, but I started to do that, putting a smile on my face every morning. And actually, what I know now is that scientifically that helps to release endorphins. And so I did actually start to feel better. And so, to cut a very long story short, I then decided that I needed to act with dignity at all times. I had that emblazoned across my forehead. So every time I had to see my ex-husband, I would make sure I was wearing nice clothes, and I'd put a bit of makeup on, and I would hold myself together. And that really helped as well to rebuild my confidence up. And over time, I kind of made it my mantra to get to the stage where, when my children get married, there is no issue between my ex and I, and we're able to be in the same room, we're able to have a conversation, we're able to be civil and polite. And that kind of kept me on the straight and narrow then for, well, the subsequent 10, 12 years now. So that's kind of my story. And that's where my motivation has come from. I want other people to know that they're not alone. There was nothing out there like the service I provide at that point in time. And I want people to know that they're not alone, and that they can do this with dignity, and that they can come out the other side feeling really proud, and they can create a new life that they enjoy and that they love.
Oh, absolutely. So many things that you've just said massively resonate with me. I love the behaving with dignity. That, I think, to have that in your mind the whole time is amazing. And the other thing that you said that is really important is that those special occasions where you both need to be there aren't going to be an issue. So I am a child of divorced parents. So I'm divorced myself, but I'm also a child of divorced parents. And my parents were both at my wedding, but it was the most horrifically awkward day ever. And that was the thing on my mind. And as a bride, all groom, but clearly I was bride. It's not what should be on your mind on your wedding day is how your parents are going to behave when they're in the same room together.
No, I always wanted my children to be able to think we can put whoever we want on our top table, if you like, and if we want mum and dad on there, that's possible. If we want mum and dad and any new partners, that should also be possible. I just don't want them to have to think about it.
Yeah.
And I often say to clients, that doesn't mean that we have to be friends, but it does mean we have to be friendly and civil and polite, and it can stop at that, but that's what we need to be.
Absolutely. And there are people who have their exes round for dinner, and that's lovely, and if that's the relationship you want to have, then good for you. But it does, as you say, it doesn't have to be like that. It just has to be so that you can be at stuff together and the kids not have to worry about it, whether you're going to behave yourselves, because they have enough going on, I think. So yeah, I'm all for that. I think that's absolutely brilliant. The comment that you made about, so back in 2008 there was no one really providing the service that you provide, and one of the things that I have found over the last sort of few years of doing this job is that there are a number of divorce coaches, but you're all quite different. We said this before we started recording today, because I've interviewed a number of divorce coaches, and you're all so very different, and the service you provide is quite different. So I wondered how, if you were there now, you would go about looking for the right person to help you.
Oh, that's a really interesting question. I think I would look for somebody who would help me to be quite proactive, who would help me to look for choices, who would help me to think about what I could do rather than getting stuck in what I couldn't. And I guess that's partly personality. My mindset is always, well, what can I do with this, rather than sort of staying stuck in feeling overwhelmed. So I think I would look for somebody who said things that resonated with me, wrote blogs that perhaps spoke to my situation, who seemed to have the same sorts of values and beliefs and approach as me. I think that's how I do it. And I think, it's always worth talking to. You can talk to as many people as you need to make a decision, and kind of go with your gut on who you feel fits best and whose approach you feel sits right with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Where would you look? So the divorce coaches that I know, and this may just be me, but all seem to be based in the south of England. And I'm not entirely sure why this is, unless divorce coaches have a pull to the sea, because you all also seem to be quite near the sea. But there don't seem to be as many, so I'm based in the northwest, don't seem to be so many up here. And I know that's not a problem, because I know that all of you are quite happy to work on Zoom. But where do I go looking? Is there an institute of divorce coaches? Is there a website that I can find you all on? Where would you look?
So some of us are registered with Resolution, for example, the family law group. So I've got a profile on Resolution website, for example. I would go straight to Google, though, to be honest.
Okay.
And I would Google divorce coaches and see what popped up, I think. There are a lot of us on Instagram, a lot of us on Facebook, LinkedIn as well. I'm very active on all of those. And also sometimes I've spent a lot of time over the last 4 years talking to lawyers and helping lawyers understand how my work sits alongside their work. And sometimes I get quite a lot of referrals from lawyers. So that's another avenue. Ask your lawyer if they've got a recommendation as well.
Yeah,
for somebody who can support you.
That's a good idea. So on that subject, so you mentioned you spend a lot of time talking to lawyers about how your work sits alongside what they do. So how does that work?
So what I find is that a lot of, I suppose previously, if you were facing a divorce, your first thought would be, oh my goodness, I need a lawyer. And that's kind of where it would stop. But actually divorce, as you know, isn't just a legal journey. There's an emotional journey, there's a financial journey to go on alongside the legal journey. And actually, often it's the emotional journey that makes the legal journey much more tricky and a lot more expensive. So I think it's understanding that to go through a divorce with dignity, with confidence, you may need to look at your support group. So who's in your support network? What professionals do you want alongside you during that journey? Not everybody's going to need a coach. Not everybody's going to need a financial advisor. Some people might decide that they can do their divorce DIY without a lawyer as well. So everybody's situation is going to be different. But definitely have a look around and see and think about what support you need in place. Because if you use your lawyer as your emotional support, it's going to cost you an absolute fortune.
It's not going to end well either, because they're not there for that.
No, and most lawyers are not trained to do that, and they don't actually want to do that either.
No, absolutely. What I found out, so I second series of the podcast was talking to people who've been through divorce and come out the other side, and what I discovered was that all of them, bar none, had some form of emotional support at some point. The ones who'd had it at the beginning of their divorce journey didn't need it later. The ones who hadn't bothered and hadn't thought they needed it during or before their divorce journey fell apart at some point later. So my first port of call is, when anybody comes to see me, it's like, right, what emotional support have you got in place? And if it's nothing, then it's right, let's send you to the person that I think is going to best fit your situation, or give them a range of numbers to call to get that support. So let's talk about the process. So if I'm in a position where either I've just decided to separate from my partner, or that decision has been made for me, and I come and talk to you for the first time, what are we going to do?
So I always talk to people for half an hour, 45 minutes before before they decide to work with me, because it's really important to make sure that we get on, that we have a rapport, that we fit. I tend to work with people over a period of time, so sort of 4 to 6 months or so. So we'll talk about what your main challenges are, what your main concerns are, what your fears are. And we'll also talk about what you'd like life to look like in that 6 month, at the end of that 6 month period, or in a year's time. Because part of the really important part of what I do isn't just helping you to cope with what's happening right now, but is to give you the resources to create a blueprint for a life that you're excited about, that you are looking forward to live. And that can be a real magnet for a lot of people to draw them forward, to stop them staying stuck in the pain of what's happening right now. So we'll talk about your hopes and your dreams and where you'd like to get to, as well as your main challenges. And I might suggest strategies during the call that people can start to use right now, sort of coaching strategies, so that people get an idea of what it would be like to actually work with me on a longer term basis. I wouldn't want anybody to leave even an initial call without something that they can take away.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talked before about your book, and as I said in my introduction, it's full of brilliant practical tips, and I'm a very practical person. I loved kind of reading through it and having things to do, like go away and do this.
Yeah.
Right, good. And I can imagine if I'd have had your book while I was going through divorce, which I wish I had done, it would have been a massive help, because that absolutely spoke to me. So what was it that led you to writing the book in the first place?
It was mostly, I wanted to write the book that I wish I'd had when I was going through my own separation. And like you say, it's full of strategies, activities, ideas, brainstorm, suggestions, all kinds of things that you can actually do to help yourself to get unstuck. Yeah. And to move forward. And it's split into kind of chapters. So it's not, you wouldn't read it necessarily from beginning to end in one sitting. You might dip in and out of different chapters. So for example, there's chapters on communication, there's chapters on taking back control, there's chapters on telling your children and supporting your children. So you can dip in and out of it, and there are exercises and suggestions in all of the chapters. And that's what I wanted. I wanted to provide people with a journey and a practical and emotional support through that journey. So I would always suggest, if you buy the book, to buy a journal as well and use it alongside.
Yes, and journals are lovely as well. You can,
yeah,
nice. Who doesn't like buying a new journal?
I know. I think I keep thinking I should create a journal with the same sort of dragonfly pictures on the front, and have it alongside the book.
That's a great idea. I think you should absolutely, definitely do that. I think that would be a brilliant combination to have those two together, and a nice pen.
Yes, and a nice pen. A teal or a turquoise pen, of course.
Yes. Getting some great business ideas today. That would be a great idea. So, big question. What do your clients get working with you directly that they don't get from the book?
So the book is obviously written in a much more general way. So when you work directly with me, we look at your precise circumstances, your exact situation. We work with your internal resources. We work through your map of the world, how you see things, your perceptions. You know, one thing that I've learned through doing this is that you can have maybe 3 people come to see you on the same day, and from the outside it looks as though they're going through the same thing. You know, perhaps 3 people come to see me whose husbands or wives have made a sudden announcement that they weren't expecting. One of them might be devastated and very depressed. Another one might be really angry, and another one might actually feel relieved. So everybody's situation is entirely different. So when you do one-to-one coaching, what you get is an absolutely tailored, bespoke service that is created just for you, and is in response just to you, rather than the book is, you know, much more generalized. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And are there particular people that you work best with? Is there a I don't want to say type of person, but do you specifically work with men, specifically work with women, specifically work with people who are going through a particular type of divorce, or is it quite open?
So it's quite open in terms of the situation people are in. So I work with people who are facing a sudden divorce.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. Could you please repeat what you said?
So I work with people in all sorts of different situations. So I work with a lot of people who perhaps have had a sudden announcement from their partner. I also work with people who are the instigators of the divorce. I've got lots of clients as well who've maybe been divorced for some time and are still struggling to come to terms with it, or finding that it's still affecting their lives. It's not really about the situation. I think it's about I love working with people who come to the coaching process open. They they actively want to do things differently. They actively want to change perhaps their approach, to see things in a different way. They're really open to trying different things, and taking on board some of the suggestions that I make. Those clients are a joy to work with, because you can really see them, the journey from here to where people end up in the end. So some of my most successful client relationships are with people who, they know perhaps they want to do it differently, but they're not quite sure how, or they're stuck in a particular place, but they want to move away from it, and they're prepared to do things in order to move away.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes complete sense. And it's interesting that they don't have to be at the beginning of the journey. It can be at any point. Because as I say, usually my first instinct is I send people when they first contact me, and it tends to be early in their journey, off to see someone for emotional support. And that could be a coach or a therapist, depending on how okay or not okay they appear to be. But it's good that they can work with you after sort of coming out the other side, because that is still, if they haven't had that emotional support throughout, it is still important to get that and to do the work, because I think you do need it at some point.
I think as well, when sometimes if people have only been working with a solicitor, their decree absolute will arrive, and the solicitor's job is done at that stage. And so I work with quite a few people who are at that point still not quite clear what the future looks like, or they've come to the end of a court process and that's taken up all their energy, but now that's over, actually there's some energy and some focus to put into creating that new life. And I love that work, to work alongside people who are creating that new existence, that new life that brings them pleasure and joy and satisfaction. So yeah.
Absolutely. And that designing of the new chapter is something that I talk about a lot with my clients, is that actually I'm not saying that divorce is a completely positive experience and that everybody should do it. But there are massive positives that can come out of it, like you were saying before about, suddenly I've got weekends to go for a bike ride on my own, and I can make decisions about when I get a babysitter and want to go out. And I think it is that not having to compromise for somebody else. Obviously you're making some compromise for children, but you kind of expect as a parent that you have to do that. But to not have to have somebody else decide where you go on holiday, or how long you go for, or when you go out, and all those sorts of things, that's actually can help you to design this new life completely yourself, can't you? Even down to things like picking the furniture and the colours of the walls and the house that you live in, and all those sorts of things. I think
well, that's something that I talk about very early on with a lot of clients. Where can you take back control over your environment, for example? It might be as simple as just getting a new duvet cover, or changing a set of curtains, or getting rid of all your old pictures and creating some new memories and putting those in frames, so that you are focusing on the future rather than looking back at what was.
No, absolutely. And I think those sorts of things can be really important, to not be totally surrounded all the time by what was, and to think about what is and what's going to be, and to try and see that positively. What could be. Absolutely. And lots of the clients that I've worked with over the years have made huge changes in terms of what they're, both you and me have gone through divorce and changed our career path because of that process. And I'm delighted with the way mine has progressed, and being able to work with people who are going through divorce. And I'm sure you must feel the same, because it's an absolute pleasure to see people move from that beginning meeting, where quite often these box of tissues come in very handy, to the continued work, and them seeing them absolutely fly and start new careers. And we've got one client who's off to buy a camper van to go traveling around the UK with her boys, and you know, really making memories as a family. It's an absolute pleasure. So yeah, there are there are definite positives, though we're not recommending it as a life choice necessarily.
No, but it can absolutely be an opportunity.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I found interesting about your book, that is different to other people who've been through what you've been through, is that I found it very balanced in its view. It wasn't at all critical of one version of events as opposed to another. It wasn't it, well, if you've had this done to you, then this is the book for you. Actually, I found that it wouldn't matter if you were the one making the decision or the one being on the receiving end, or if you'd made the decision together. Actually, there wasn't a judgment in it. Was that must be how something that you feel inside, but was that a conscious decision?
No, it wasn't a conscious decision, but it is absolutely something that I feel inside. And whatever clients come to me with, I'm never going to judge them on it. I've heard all kinds of things that other people might judge, and it's really, what's really important to me is that I understand that there are different perceptions. So what might be my perception of what happened is totally different probably to what my ex-husband's perception is of what happened, and that's really normal. It doesn't mean that either of our perceptions is wrong, but we both have a different truth that we stand in. And so I do a lot of work with people around helping them to understand things from different perspectives, whether that's their ex's perspective or their children's perspective. And it can often help to bring compassion into the process and understanding, and dial down a lot of conflict. So yes, that is really important to me. That, you know, as humans, we all have totally different maps of the world. This is my NLP training coming through. We all have totally different maps of the world and totally different understandings of what happened, and that's normal and that's okay. And so I veer away from the kind of, this is the right path, this is the wrong path, because actually what we need to do is just find the right path for you.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's really useful, because there can be a lot of guilt if you feel like you're in the wrong. And actually, what I've found, and I'm sure you must have done as well, is that quite often that there's something on both sides that wasn't working.
Yeah.
You know, and you can't go through carrying the guilt of the relationship not working by feeling like you were in the wrong. I think is one of those things that because otherwise you tend to give everything. When I get involved and start looking at the finances, it's almost like, well, I'm going to give away kind of everything because that absolves me of the guilt that I've got, and that doesn't help anybody either, I don't think. No,
I do a lot of work with clients around letting go of guilt. You know, nothing is ever 100% A or B, is it? The world is not that black and white. Yeah. So yeah, I do a lot of work around that with people. You know, guilt is one of those things, and shame as well, that is a very emotional tie to the past that can stop you from moving forward. And it's something that you have to, you know, resentment or guilt or shame is something that you kind of have to put energy into holding on to. And it can be really damaging in the long term. Yeah, absolutely. One of the other things that I come across is clients feeling that sense of failure. You know, you kind of almost think, oh well, it should be really should. It should be really, you know, marriage shouldn't be that difficult, you know, and I failed at something that, you know, should be really easy, and none of my family have ever got divorced, and you know, none of my friends are divorced, and all those sorts of things. And I think that can be really difficult. I'm assuming you can help with that area as well. Yeah, that can be really difficult. And you know, I often say to people, you know, there's no such thing as failure, only feedback. So what can you learn from this? What can you learn from this to take forward for next time, if there's a next time? What can you learn from this in order to model something different, for example, for your children? You know, to start to reframe some of that feeling of failure to actually, was it failure, or were you really brave, for example? Or, you know, how can you look at this differently so that it doesn't hold you back and you can learn from it and take it forward and grow from it?
Yeah, I think that's really important. You were saying before about when you receive your decree absolute, that's the end of the solicitor's bit, and I have seen it where the solicitors are, and this is by no means a criticism of those lovely lawyers that I work with, but I have seen it where, you know, family lawyers have sent the email with, oh, here's your decree absolute, great news, it's here, and a lot of people don't feel that's great news. You know, there are those who do and want to go out and have a party at the end of it, but I certainly didn't feel like it was great news. I kind of, it came with a massive bucket of sadness for me that it was the end of an era, and you know, it wasn't that I didn't want it to be concluded because it was the right thing, but it wasn't a moment of, oh, I'll go and pop open a bottle of champagne. It was definitely a kind of, a sort of sadness that chapter was finished. I think
there's definitely a grieving process to go through through any separation, and that sadness is part of that, and different people will feel it differently and look at it differently, and that's all okay. You know, that there is a grieving process to get, and often for people it's, you were saying just now about, you know, it should have been easy, or, you know, but oftentimes I find that what people are grieving is what they thought they were going to get, or what they feel they should have had, and the relationship that they believed they were going to have, and that can be really hard to come to terms with, and it's all part of the emotional journey.
I think that's absolutely spot on. So we're nearly at the end of our time together, sadly. So do you have 3 top tips for people who are facing divorce?
I do. So I would say that one of the first things is to work out what you can and can't control, and focus on the things that you can control. So, for example, you can't control your ex's behaviour or actions or words, but you can absolutely control your own. So focus on that and focus on what you can do in those areas. And that can be something simple, you know, something as simple as which supermarket you shop in, or how you cut your hair, or, you know, all sorts of things like that. Take back control where you can, and let go of it where you can't. I think secondly, always remember that you have choices. So I will say to people, if you think you've only got one option, then you're stuck. If you think you have 2 options, then you're kind of in a bit of a rock and a hard place, and that's not much better. It's a dilemma. But if you can think of 3 or more options, then you have real choice. Even if you don't like 1 or 2 of the options, you're then making a conscious choice to go down a particular path, and that can feel really empowering. And I think the third thing is a little mantra to follow whenever you feel the emotions rising, or you feel yourself getting het up, or the stress rising, whatever it might be. Stop and breathe and think before you respond. Get oxygen back to your brain, get your logical brain back on side, out of fight, flight, freeze, by stopping and breathing.
I think that's good advice. I read something the other day about responding, like writing your response, but don't send it for 24 hours or something. I was like, that might be one of your posts, actually.
It might be. I talk about the 24-hour rule. So if something, if an email comes in that riles you, makes you angry, upsets you, whatever it is, maybe read it through once. If you want to slap out a reply there and then, do it, but don't send it. Put it in your draft box, sleep on it, come back tomorrow, reread it. And then I will say to people on emails in particular, read through your email and even print it, cross out with a big black pen anything you don't need to reply to, personal attacks, that kind of thing. Highlight anything that is a proper question that you actually need to give a response to, and then just reply to those. But always leave it 24 hours if you can.
I think that's great advice. I think that's really good advice, because there is that temptation if something roused you to go,
Yeah.
and that's never going to end well.
No, you get stuck in this cycle of you said, I said, he said, she said, round and round and the conflict rises, the emotions rise. Yeah, and it all gets very difficult then.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been absolutely brilliant to talk to you, Claire. I really, really appreciate it, and we'll catch you soon.
Thank you very much, Tamsin. It's a pleasure.